You are watching Tech Confessions, created by Amy Lewis and brought to you by VMware.
Welcome to Tech Confessions.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad I participated in the...
Well, we are so glad you stopped by, and by that I mean you paused for 1 second and all of a sudden you were sitting on the couch telling everything you ever knew.
Hopefully this is not like HBO Taxi Cab Confession. So
it's very similar. So we always like to ask people, you've had many different jobs in the industry through the years. What was your software-defined moment when you really started thinking, wow, look at all that you can do in software instead of hardware?
that is a very interesting question. Means coming from a customer background, brokerage, financials, logistics, and then entering into a networking world where hardware is nowadays a king of the conversation. But if you look at back old days, all networking gear was actually software. So software was intrinsic part of the call networking story. But what was more important was that at that time the value or the requirement of the network was more geared towards the hardware. And then you become that hardware state of mind, and you think that is the only conceivable way you can do things. And it still remain and persistent hysteria or hysteresis exist in some mind because you have lived that paradigm or that requirement so much. But then in 2011, kind of it comes from a famous saying, you first ridicule it, first you ignore it, then you laugh about it, and then finally you accept it, right? So it's not like a super aha moment, but when Nasira got conceptualized, folks invited me, see if I can participate in that adventure. I did it purely because of that
that mindset?
Mindset.
Yeah.
And then when they got acquired by VMware, then it's like, yeah, what is it? VM is a VM, and why networking has nothing to do with it. But when this conversation shifted, when I started exploring, saying, okay, what else that is there in this called software world? And my first exposures that I worked in Cisco was big data. And a big data part where how a Hadoop systems and other open source ecosystems is fundamentally changing the traditional paradigm. And that is all through called brute force compute, brute force algorithm that enforces and crunches large amount of data. So that becomes a first call serious casting or the umbrella of idea that I started gravitating towards. And eventually when I started looking at the capabilities of what VMware or Nasira was advertising, it clearly dawned on me saying, wow, any other networking company has a software, they process packet, they are processing the packet, and instead of using the specific hardware, they are doing it purely in software. And still it like, wow, but what about performance? What about this and what about that? And then I read a couple of interesting trade rag magazine, and in that moment, I sent an email to my brother-in-law who works for IEEE saying, I'm out of the this business of hardware and software. I'll be purely in software.
Oh my gosh.
That email.
Are you kidding?
Yes.
It was like that, like
Yes.
much of it. Wow. So I love when you talk about the mindset and sort of how you think, when you talk to customers, because you did have such a light bulb moment.
Yes.
How do you help them sort of think about it differently? Because I know every problem is different, every workload is different, et cetera. But when partners are going through or customers are going through this transition, how do you talk to them about that based on your own experience?
First you correlate, right? You have a background. Then you be amazingly candid that a network doesn't just run on air. you still need hardware.
Yes.
You still need an Intel chipset. Hardware is an important part of the called software ecosystems, offload, etc.
Which I love. It's
yeah.
not like don't throw out everything you've ever learned or known or thought.
Yeah, unless you invent a called photonic wireless compute, where you don't need any called physical world of interactions. So you first be fair and candid on that it's not just, when we discuss this whole thing, we throw almost all the baby out with the bathwater, and that is not the case, right? That's first. Second is, I give lots of different examples of an application requiring a line rate or an application needing it. Is it really needed in a, let's say, example, if you're doing a mission critical, if you're doing a trade floor design where extreme low latency matters, if you're doing a quantitative real-time data, etc., versus a traditional enterprise workload, where a few seconds of delay may be okay because the bigger delay is in the storage, in the application response, application logic, the wide area network. So I really ask the question is, do you need a rocket man? No pun intended to the North Korean leader, but rocket man networking.
Yeah.
Or does it good enough, just good enough?
Yeah.
That basically change the way you do things. I also give you another technical representation. Hadoop is a classical example, or big data database, where a very strict paradigm of row and column oriented database, where there are very strict rules how do you access that data. But what Hadoop and Google and others did in the big table is that they just twisted that rule and allow a tremendous flexibility how a data can be stored, manipulated, and organized. And it unleashes the completely different way of realizing that you can build the databases or the data sets. And the same thing in NSX, essentially what you're doing is you are not trying to completely reinvent the networking world, but just enough to enable those workload and a provisioning in a software way so that you can leverage all other software ecosystem on top of it. And that's how I start resonating
I love it.
value. So,
and I know you mentioned before you read some articles. What are some of the ways that you like to stay current? Because there's so much to consume. We get that question all the time. How do I stay up on every trend? What are some of the ways that you stay connected to what's happening in the next thing?
Yeah, that's a alwaysly struggling question. My personality is I want to know everything. I want to be in everywhere. I want to be seen with everybody, kind of a mentality. So it's very hard. But I also have found a lot of my ex-Cisco colleagues or ex-networking folks says, hey, how do I get into this field? And I say that start dabbling into it. Start jump into it. Pick up few topics that you gravitate towards. Learn from a diverse viewpoint. Learn from, I said, if you really want to tap into Drive, hol.vmware.com has a fantastic set of labs. If you want to come and interview me, just read my design guide. But stay connected with the industry leaders. There are tons of free, all of this Dell technology, VMware are available free online. You register yourself and learn it. So there are varieties ways of learning it, but I wouldn't say that, hey, that's one direct path that will give you to nirvana. Spread out, develop an affinity, then go deep, go horizontal, go vertical.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time and confession today.
Thank you. Glad I can participate and contribute.
If you're ready to make your tech confession, join us at techconfessionstheshow.com.